The auction block in Silver Creek had seen many shameful things, but nothing quite like the day Samuel Harrison watched a father sell his own daughter like livestock. August heat pressed down on the dusty square where men gathered to bid on whatever misfortune had dragged to market that week. Foreclosed farm equipment. Confiscated goods. Sometimes horses too old to work. Samuel had come for a plough blade, nothing more. He stood at the back of the crowd, hat pulled low, wanting only to make his purchase and return to the quiet of his ranch in the hills. The auctioneer's voice carried across the square, nasal and bored. Next item. Female. Approximately 18 years. 8 months along, as you can see. A ripple of laughter moved through the crowd. Father selling to cover debts. She can cook, clean, all the usual. Samuel's head came up slowly. Through the gap in the crowd, he saw her. A girl, rail-thin except for the swell of her belly, standing on the platform with her head bowed. Her dress was clean but patched in so many places it looked like a quilt. Her dark hair hung loose down her back, tangled and dull. She kept her hands folded over her stomach, protective even in her humiliation. Her father stood beside the auctioneer, a narrow-faced man with tobacco-stained teeth. He grinned at the crowd. She's damaged goods, I'll grant you that. But the baby might be useful. Strong stock on my side of the family. Could get years of work out of it. The girl flinched as if he'd struck her. She didn't lift her head. Didn't make a sound. But Samuel saw her hands tighten over her belly, knuckles white. Let's start the bidding at $5, the auctioneer called. Silence. Men shifted their weight, studied their boots. Someone coughed. Someone else muttered something that made his neighbor laugh. But no one raised a hand. Come now, gentlemen. $5 for a servant and a worker-to-be? That's generous. More silence. The girl's shoulders began to shake. She still didn't lift her head, but Samuel could see the tears dripping onto her folded hands. $3 then. The auctioneer's voice had gone sharp with irritation. $3 and you can put her to work tomorrow. A man in the front called out, "What would I want with a ruined girl and another man's bastard?" You'd have to pay me to take that burden. Laughter rippled through the crowd again. The girl's father scowled. Now see here, she's not that bad. She can earn her keep. And once the baby comes, you'll have 2 useless mouths to feed, someone else shouted. We've got enough problems without taking on yours. The auctioneer sighed. $1. $1 to take her off the father's hands. The girl lifted her head then, just slightly. Samuel caught a glimpse of her face. Young. So young. Her eyes were dark and empty, like someone had reached in and scooped out everything that made a person human. She looked at the crowd with that hollow expression, and Samuel felt something crack open in his chest. Anyone? $1. Her father grabbed her arm. Keep your head down. You're making it worse. She obeyed, folding in on herself again. Samuel watched her hands move over her belly in slow circles, soothing the child inside even as she stood on the auction block like a piece of furniture. This is embarrassing, the auctioneer muttered. He glanced at the father. You might as well take her home. No one wants. $20. Samuel's voice cut through the square, rough from disuse. Every head turned. The crowd parted as Samuel pushed through, ignoring the stares. He climbed the steps to the platform, pulled a $20 gold piece from his pocket, and held it out to the auctioneer. The man blinked. You're bidding 20? I only asked for one. $20. Samuel's jaw was set. And you take it now before I change my mind. The auctioneer snatched the coin. Sold to the gentleman from the hills. He pointed at the girl. She's yours. Good luck with her. Samuel finally looked at her directly. She stared back, confusion and fear warring in her expression. Up close, he could see how thin she was. Her collarbone jutted sharp beneath her dress. Her wrists were narrow as a child's. Only her belly was round and full, impossibly large on her small frame. "Can you walk?" he asked quietly. She nodded. "Then come on." He turned without waiting to see if she followed, but he heard her footsteps behind him, quick and uncertain. Her father called something after them, probably a thank you for the money, but Samuel didn't acknowledge it. He kept walking until they reached his wagon at the edge of the square. He helped her up onto the seat, noting how light she was despite the pregnancy. She moved carefully, wincing as she settled herself. When he climbed up beside her and took the reins, she sat rigid, hands folded in her lap, staring straight ahead. They rode in silence through Silver Creek and out onto the open road. The afternoon sun beat down merciless and hot. Grasshoppers sang in the dry grass. The wagon wheels creaked a steady rhythm. Samuel glanced at her sidelong. "What's your name?" She was quiet so long he thought she wouldn't answer. Finally, barely audible, "Esther." "Esther." He nodded. "I'm Samuel. Samuel Harrison. My ranch is about an hour north of here. You'll have your own room. You'll eat what I eat. I expect you to help with cooking and such when you're able, but not until after the baby comes. Understand?" She turned to look at him then, eyes wide. "You're not going to?" She stopped, color flooding her pale cheeks. "I'm not going to anything," Samuel said firmly. "You needed help. I helped. That's all." Tears welled in her eyes. She looked away quickly, swiping at her face. "Thank you," she whispered. They rode on. The sun tracked slowly west. Mountains rose purple in the distance. Samuel's ranch lay in the foothills, a day's ride from the nearest neighbor. It was isolated, which was how he preferred it. He'd built the house himself after the war, determined to find some corner of the world where no one would bother him. For 5 years, he'd lived alone with his horses and his silence. Now he'd gone and brought home a pregnant girl. He must be losing his mind. Esther shifted beside him, one hand pressed to her side. Her breathing had gone shallow. Samuel frowned. "You all right?" "Yes." But her voice was tight. 10 minutes later, she gasped. Her whole body went rigid. "Esther. Something's wrong." The words came out strangled. She doubled over as much as her belly would allow, both hands clutching her stomach. "Oh God. Oh no." Samuel pulled the horses to a stop. "What's happening?" I can't hold it in anymore." She was panting now, face gone white. "It's coming out." He looked around frantically. They were in the middle of nowhere, nothing but scrub grass and empty sky in all directions. "You need to relieve yourself? I can help you down." She shook her head violently, tears streaming. "No. No, you don't understand." She met his eyes, terrified. "The baby. I can't hold the baby in anymore." Samuel's blood went cold. "You're in labor?" "I think so." "I don't know. It's too early. It's not supposed to happen yet." Another contraction hit and she cried out, bending forward. "Please. Something's wrong. It hurts." He climbed down and came around to her side, mind racing. He delivered calves. He delivered foals. He'd even helped a neighbor's wife once during a difficult birth, though he'd mostly just held a lamp and followed instructions. But this was different. This was a girl barely more than a child herself, a month too early, in the middle of nowhere with no help coming. "All right." He forced his voice steady. "All right, we can do this. Can you get down?" She tried. He caught her as her knees buckled, and half carried her to the back of the wagon. There was a top there, and blankets. He spread them on the ground in the shade of the wagon, making a rough bed. Esther collapsed onto it, sobbing. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Stop apologizing." Samuel knelt beside her. His hands were shaking. He fisted them, willing them still. How far apart are the pains? I don't know. They won't stop. They just keep, she screamed as another one seized her, back arching. Samuel had never felt so helpless in his life. During the war, he'd carried wounded men off battlefields. He'd held dying soldiers and promised them they'd be fine even when he could see their life draining into the mud. He'd learned to function through horror, to do what needed doing no matter how impossible it seemed. But watching Esther writhe in pain, her small body racked with contractions, he felt that same cold terror he'd known in battle. The certainty that he was about to watch someone die and there was nothing he could do to stop it. I can't do this, Esther gasped between contractions. I can't. I'm going to die. The baby's going to die. No, Samuel gripped her hand. No, you're not. Listen to me. I've delivered animals. It's not that different. The baby knows what to do. Your body knows what to do. We just have to help it along. She looked at him with those hollow eyes, and for a moment he saw not fear but a terrible resignation. She'd already given up. She'd been giving up for months, probably since the moment her father decided to sell her. Esther. He squeezed her hand hard enough to make her focus. You are not dying today. Do you hear me? I didn't pay $20 just to watch you quit. A ghost of something flickered across her face. Maybe anger. Maybe hope. $20 was too much, she whispered. It was a bargain. He pushed her hair back from her forehead, surprised by his own gentleness. Now I need you to listen. When the next pain comes, you're going to push. Can you do that? She nodded, jaw set. The next contraction built like a wave. Samuel could see it in how her body tensed, how her breathing changed. When it crested, she bore down, screaming. Good. That's good. Again. They fell into a rhythm. Pain, push, breathe. Pain, push, breathe. The sun crawled across the sky. Shadows lengthened. Samuel's shirt was soaked with sweat. Esther's face had gone grey, her lips bloodless. But she kept pushing. Kept fighting. I can see the head, Samuel said, and he heard the shake in his own voice. One more, Esther. One more big push. She gathered herself, every ounce of strength left in her thin frame. When the contraction came, she pushed with everything she had. The baby slipped into Samuel's trembling hands. He delivered dozens of calves. But holding this tiny, slippery human, a girl, perfect and complete, was entirely different. For a moment, he just stared at her, awed by the fragile miracle of her existence. Then he realized she wasn't breathing. Panic surged through him. The baby was limp in his hands, skin tinged blue. No cry. No movement. Esther was asking something, her voice frantic, but he couldn't hear her over the roaring in his ears. His hands moved on instinct, the same way they moved when a calf came out wrong. He turned the baby over, fingers probing her tiny mouth, clearing mucus from her throat. He rubbed her back in firm circles, trying to stimulate breath. Nothing. Please, he heard himself saying. Come on, little one. Come on. He laid her on the blanket and pressed gently on her chest, once, twice, 3 times. Rubbed her again. The baby's face was peaceful, eyes closed like she was sleeping. No, the word tore out of him. No, you don't get to give up. Not after all this. He cleared her airway again, more aggressively this time. Rubbed her chest hard enough to leave red marks on the delicate skin. Pressed and released, pressed and released. The way he'd done with stillborn calves when he refused to accept what the silence meant. The baby jerked. Samuel froze. She jerked again, then her tiny mouth opened. She sucked in a breath that seemed too big for her small lungs. And then she cried. The sound was thin and reedy, more of a mewl than a proper wail. But it was life. It was breath. Samuel's vision blurred. He realized he was crying, tears dripping off his jaw onto the blanket as he wrapped the baby carefully and held her up. Esther! Esther, look! Esther dragged herself up on her elbows. When she saw the baby moving, crying, her face crumpled. She reached out with shaking hands. Samuel placed the infant against her chest, and Esther curled around her daughter, sobbing so hard her whole body shook. She's alive. She's alive. Oh God, she's alive. Samuel sat back on his heels, suddenly exhausted. His hands were still trembling. He looked down at them, these scarred, calloused hands that had dealt so much death during the war. Hands that had just pulled a life back from the edge of nothing. You gave her life twice. Esther's voice was thick with tears. She looked up at him, and for the first time there was something in her eyes besides emptiness. Once when you bought me. Once with your hands just now. Samuel didn't know what to say to that. He busied himself with cleaning up, giving mother and child privacy. When he'd done what he could, he came back to find Esther nursing the baby, both of them peaceful. We need a name, he said quietly. Esther looked at him, surprised. I thought you'd want to choose. She's as much yours as mine. She's yours. Esther's voice was firm. You gave her breath. You gave us both a future. She's your daughter. The word settled into Samuel's chest, foreign and frightening and somehow right. Daughter. He'd never expected to have children. Had convinced himself he didn't want them, didn't deserve them after the things he'd done. He looked at the baby's tiny face, eyes squeezed shut, mouth working as she nursed. Already fighting to live, just minutes after fighting for her first breath. Grace, he said. We'll call her Grace. Esther smiled. It transformed her entire face, erasing years of pain in an instant. Grace. That's perfect. They stayed there until the baby finished nursing and fell asleep. Then Samuel rigged a sling from a blanket and helped Esther back into the wagon. He drove slowly, carefully, watching both of them. Esther held Grace against her heart, whispering to her, and Samuel felt something in his chest he'd thought died years ago. Hope. The dangerous, fragile thing he'd sworn never to feel again. When they reached the ranch as the sun set, painting everything gold and crimson, Samuel carried Esther inside and settled her in the bedroom. His bedroom, which he gave up without a second thought. He'd sleep in the barn until he could build another room. Rest, he told her. I'll bring you food and water. Whatever you need. Samuel. She caught his hand as he turned to leave. Why did you do this? Really? He thought about how she'd looked on that auction block. Head bowed. Hands protective over her belly. Empty eyes staring at a crowd that saw her as garbage. Because you needed someone to, he said simply. Over the next weeks, Samuel watched Esther slowly come back to life. It was like watching spring arrive after a brutal winter. First came physical healing. Her body recovering from birth, growing stronger. Then came the tentative smiles when Grace did something adorable. Then laughter, rusty from disuse but genuine. She'd been a ghost for so long she'd forgotten how to be human. But Grace taught her. The baby demanded life, and Esther had no choice but to provide it. Samuel built a cradle. Then a bigger bed for Esther's room. Then a rocking chair. His hand stayed busy while his heart did something he couldn't quite name. One evening, he came in from the barn to find Esther singing. A lullaby, sweet and low. She looked up when he entered, and there was something new in her eyes. Not just life, but joy. Grace smiled today, she said. A real smile, not just gas. Did she? Samuel hung his hat and came to look. The baby was asleep in her cradle, one tiny fist curled under her chin. She's perfect. She's ours. Esther's voice was soft. You said that, remember? The day she was born. You said she's ours now. Samuel met her eyes. I meant it. So did I. Esther stood, moved closer. Samuel, I know this wasn't what you planned. I know we're a burden. You're not a burden. Let me finish. She took a breath. You saved us. Both of us. You gave us a home when we had nothing. And I want you to know that I see it. I see you. Not just what you did, but who you are. Samuel's throat tightened. Esther. You're a good man. The best I've ever known. And if you'll have us, really have us, not just out of duty, I'd like to stay. Not as a servant. As a wife. As the mother of your daughter. The words hung in the air between them. Samuel thought about the empty years he'd spent on this ranch, convincing himself solitude was what he deserved. Thought about the moment he'd seen her on that auction block and felt his carefully constructed walls start to crack. Thought about holding Grace in his trembling hands, feeling her take her first breath, and knowing he'd do anything to protect this fragile life. I'm not an easy man, he said slowly. I've got demons. Bad dreams from the war. Some days I'm not fit company. I've got demons too. Esther reached for his hand. Maybe we can fight them together. Samuel looked down at their joined hands. Hers so small in his. Both scarred in different ways. Yes, he said. I'll have you. Both of you. For as long as you'll stay. Esther's smile was sunlight after rain. Then we're a family. They married the next month in the small church in Silver Creek. Only a handful of people attended, the kind folks who didn't judge, who saw what Samuel had done and called it good. Esther wore a simple dress Samuel bought her, blue as a summer sky. Grace slept through the ceremony in a neighbor woman's arms. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Samuel kissed Esther gently, reverently, and felt the last of his walls come down. They built a life together. Samuel taught Esther to ride. She taught him to laugh. Grace grew strong and healthy, filling the house with baby babbles that turned to words, then sentences. Samuel built her a crib, then a bed, then a desk for when she was old enough for lessons. Word spread about what Samuel had done, buying a pregnant girl no one else would claim, delivering her baby by the roadside, giving them his name. Some folks called him a fool. But others, those who'd seen too much cruelty in their own lives, called him something else. Hero. Saint. Good man. Samuel didn't think he was any of those things. He was just a man who'd seen someone in need and refused to look away. But when he held his daughter, when Esther smiled at him across the dinner table, when he woke in the night to check on them and found them both sleeping peaceful and safe, he thought maybe he'd finally found redemption. Maybe those hands that had dealt death could also give life. Maybe the man he'd been in the war didn't have to be the man he was forever. Maybe Grace was more than just a name. Maybe it was a promise. A second chance. A gift he'd spent the rest of his life earning. On Grace's first birthday, they invited neighbors for a celebration. The house filled with laughter and music. Samuel stood on the porch, watching through the window as Esther danced with their daughter, both of them glowing with happiness. You did good, Harrison, one of the neighbors said, clapping him on the shoulder. Real good. Samuel just nodded, throat too tight for words. He thought about that day in Silver Creek. The auction block. The empty eyes. The terrified girl going into labor in the middle of nowhere. His hands trembling as he held a lifeless baby and refused to let her go. All of it had led to this. To laughter in his house. To a wife who looked at him like he'd hung the moon. To a daughter who called him Papa and meant it. Grace toddled over to the window and pressed her small hand against the glass, grinning at him. Samuel pressed his hand to the other side, matching hers. I love you too, little one, he whispered. Inside, Esther began to sing. Grace clapped her hands. And Samuel Harrison, who'd thought his heart was too scarred to feel anything good ever again, felt it swell with more love than he'd known possible. He'd paid $20 for a girl on an auction block. But what he'd received was worth more than all the gold in Montana. A family. A purpose. A reason to believe in second chances. And every time he looked at Grace, every time he saw Esther smile, he knew the same truth that had driven him that day in Silver Creek. Sometimes the most valuable things are the ones everyone else throws away. Sometimes redemption comes when you're brave enough to reach out and claim it. And sometimes, with trembling hands and a desperate prayer, you can catch a life just before it slips away. Sometimes you can save someone. And sometimes, in saving them, you save yourself.